Thank you, Mr. Undersecretary. My pleasure. Good afternoon. I guess it's almost afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Admiral, again for Admiral Undersecretary, for your gracious comments. And it brought back to mind the fact that even though I served in the Army only a little more than 2 years, 1 year in Vietnam, the other year back in the States, when I went to the Naval Historical Center, now the Naval History and Heritage Command, I was known as the Army guy. And I have to say that after 40 years of serving at Naval History, I was still the Army guy at the end, even though having done a lot of naval history. But so I'm truly joint, if you will. The talk today that I'm going to give is based on, as the Undersecretary mentioned, the recently published Ready Seapower, History of the U.S. 7th Fleet. We have copies of that. A PDF copy is available on the website of the Naval History and Heritage Command if you'd like to get a free copy or at least take a look at it. If you'd like to actually purchase a copy, a hardcover or softcover copy from the government printing office, you can find it by going to the military site on GPO. And if you call now, we double the offer, so don't miss out. My talk today, and it's an overview, obviously, the only time we have with us, and it's a long history, the latter half of the 20th century and the first decade of the 21st century. It's a lot of history to cover, and the fleet was certainly very busy during that time. If you take away one thing in my bottom line up front, I know military folks like bluff, is that the Navy's and the 7th Fleet in particular's presence in the Far East has been substantial in many aspects since 1945 and then even before in World War II. So I'm just going to give an overview of what the Navy's done and what I think has been its contribution, the 7th Fleet's contribution to U.S. interests in the Far East. And I think the 7th Fleet in particular has had a dramatic and really lasting influence on protecting and promoting U.S. interests in the Far East. As the Undersecretary mentioned, the fleet was established on the 19th of February, 1943. The initial commander was Vice Admiral Arthur Carpenter, who does not go down in naval history with great recognition. He didn't get along with General MacArthur, for whom he served, and so he was quickly moved on to other positions. He was succeeded by Vice Admiral Thomas Kinkaid, and Admiral Kinkaid led the fleet from that point on to the end of the war. It was, as you might expect, MacArthur loved to put his name to all kinds of things, called MacArthur's Navy. And Admiral Kinkaid, as his subordinate naval component commander, you would have thought could have been under a lot of pressure because MacArthur was not known to be Navy friendly or to be a benign presence with other naval officers. He and Halsey did not get along very well. He had issues with Admiral Nimitz and Admiral Admiral King back in Washington. But Tom Kinkaid learned how to work for the general, and they had a workable relationship. There was no animosity or anything of that sort. He did represent naval interest, obviously, and but he was not a toady, if you will. He did not just go along with the general as some others in his employ did. Sutherland comes to mind, and Willoughby is another. But on occasion, and there were only a few occasions, Admiral Kinkaid was prepared to resign his position, to get out of town if his views were not listened to. One in particular was they were planning an operation into the Philippines, and Admiral Kinkaid was concerned with the paucity of air support and the fear that the Japanese land-based air power would pose a real threat to his fleet. And so he wanted to delay several weeks before he started the operation. MacArthur was opposed to that. He wanted to get going right away. And the admiral, I guess, remonstrated with MacArthur, and he finally agreed, okay, we'll delay. So he got his way on that time. But their relationship was workable, and MacArthur said very nice things about Kinkaid at the end of the war when they parted ways and went on to other missions. The Seventh Fleet, of course, was MacArthur's Navy, MacArthur's fleet, and operated throughout the Southwest Pacific area. The battles for New Guinea, Biak, Hollandia, all those sites, went into the Admiralty Islands, secured those islands, and then, of course, moved on to the Philippines. Probably the most stellar accomplishment of the Seventh Fleet during World War II in the Pacific was the Battle of Leyte Gulf, certainly a turning point in the Pacific War. And with the destruction of the Japanese, Imperial Japanese Navy for the most part, that Navy never became a sizable threat from that point to the end of the war. This was a key turning point. The Seventh Fleet, Admiral Jesse Oldendorf with his battleships in Surigao Strait, crossing the T, famous naval stratagem. 5 of those battleships, of course, were raised from the mud of Pearl Harbor to take part in that battle and exacted great revenge. So that was their stellar accomplishment. Moving on from World War II, and this will be the body of my talk because I want to impress on, hopefully you, that the Navy's presence was in many ways more important in terms of the political, military, the strategic interests of the United States than warfighting. Warfighting was a big part of what the Seventh Fleet has done and might do in the future. But the Seventh Fleet was one of the primary instruments of U.S. foreign policy in the Far East from 1945 and to this day. That's a very important fact. One of those factors is freedom of the seas. Now, this goes back to the founding of the Republic. Protection of the oceans so that the free flow of commerce can happen has been a bedrock position of U.S. foreign policy. And that's something that the Seventh Fleet has done in the Western Pacific from 1945 on. That has enabled economic prosperity to flourish throughout the Cold War and the post-Cold War years. We have not had to worry about another Japanese Navy or German Navy. We had control of the seas. There was no question about it. Only during the late 70s, early 80s did the Soviet Navy pose somewhat of a threat to our control of the sea. But that was it. Throughout this whole period I'm talking about, it allowed Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, Southeast Asian countries, Australia, New Zealand, to carry on their commerce at sea without real fear of opposition, a foreign navy opposing that presence. You'll all remember, well, the Japanese economy, even though it slipped to 3rd place, was until recently the 2nd most powerful economy on Earth. Part of that's because of the not having to worry about what happens at the sea. The Asian tigers, remember that back in the 80s? The Asian tigers were flourishing in the economic arena. Even the People's Republic of China has benefited from the protection provided by our naval presence in the Far East. The Seventh Fleet has been the glue with regard to our alliances with 5 Pacific nations that exist to this day: Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, and New Zealand, and until 1979 with the Republic of China and Taiwan. And those alliances have held firm throughout that period to the present. In regard to the alliance with Japan, and that was probably maybe one of the most important of our alliances, and still is, in regard to Northeast Asia. You may remember that we had difficulties with the Japanese populace when we wanted some of our nuclear-powered ships to operate from the ports in Japan. That caused great consternation among a lot of the Japanese public. There were demonstrations when Sea Dragon, a nuclear-powered attack submarine, went into Sasebo in 1964. But thereafter, for years afterward, hundreds of nuclear-powered ships went in and still do to this day. The same thing occurred with an even bigger ship, made more of a presence, the nuclear-powered carrier Enterprise in 1968. Big demonstrations throughout Japan. The point is this, that even though there was opposition by a sizable segment of the Japanese population, the government and most Japanese, the majority of Japanese, realized that this connection to the United States was valuable And so that has all died away. That's not an issue. Let me proceed. I'm jumping ahead. Here's the Seventh Fleet's area of responsibility. 48 million square miles. That's a lot of water between the Aleutians and the Indian Ocean. It encompasses 35 countries in that area.